Thank you, everyone. Sorry about the technical difficulties. We are now streaming. The link on the website is also live. It will take you to Facebook. Hello, welcome. Sorry, just to tell everybody that we were a little delayed, but we're ready to go. So welcome, and I'll turn it over to the chair, Keith Miller.
Well, thanks, everyone. Appreciate everyone being here today. I know we've got a lot of work to do in this task force and we'll get started, but I wanted to take a minute to recognize Councilmember Girondo, who's here. As the task force knows, the Econ Committee and the Education and Culture Committee is how this task force was formed. And so just before we get into our work, I thought it'd be a great opportunity to recognize Councilmember Girondo and just ask if you have any comments or anything to share about the committee. I know this was part of your work, so
I appreciate it. Thank you. I'll be very brief because I know you got important work. Good morning. I think it's still morning. Yeah. Good morning to everybody, and good to see you. And I know Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez and I had this joint committee, and we're really excited about it. And it builds upon like a lot of work that's been happening as Cutter knows, you know, with the Hall of Fame. Like we've been just doing a lot of cool sports stuff in the county in the last few years. And builds on all the work around out of school time, mental health for our young people, equity in sports, especially for young women and diversely abled folks. And I just think we have a real opportunity in our economy, right? Like how do we take advantage of all the energy? I was looking online today to take my daughter, who's a very good basketball player in the 8th grade, to the Indiana Fever Mystics game, and they have tickets on there like for like $10,000.
Yeah.
And if you would have checked that 5 years ago, nowhere near that. So and that is all. I know I don't have to tell Matt, and if like it has filtered down in the youth sports world to a way that is really exciting, but we also want to make sure we're capturing that and also doing it in an equitable way and really bringing more people to Montgomery County. So all the things we talked about in the session, I'm really excited, and getting people more access to fields and different sports and all the things that you guys are going to talk about. So I'm really excited that you're here, and just wanted to come in and sit in for a little while. Michelle's who's my chief of staff, stay time, and I see Tommy on there. I'm sure he's staying online the whole time. And Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez. But we're excited, and just thank you for having me, and thank you for leading and everyone participating.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for being here today. Appreciate it. So as the first meeting of the task force, I thought we would start out with some procedures and kind of just go over some kind of the groundwork here and behind it. And so, the task force is subject to the Maryland Open Meetings Act. So from a procedural process, the task force will conduct our meetings in this open format. And I know we have members of the community on the screen here. So, but the task force will basically be recognizing members of the task force as far as discussion and so on and so forth. The task force may decide in the future to provide an opportunity for guest speakers and for public comment, but that will be projected ahead of time and put onto the agendas and posted outside. So I wanted to ask Belil to go over kind of really some of the structure that you put in place, which is, I think, a website and the agendas and the kind of the minutes and how that's all going to work.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, so we worked closely with our legal team and IT and communications to make sure that we're complying with the Open Meetings Act. So we have a web page, which I will flash now on the screen here. Because it's so fancy. Nope, that is not it. Okay, sorry. 1 second. Anyway, there is a website you can find out, and on the website, as I'll show you in a second, is the agendas, the calendar, a description of the group, all the members, and then you'll be able to find the agendas posted a week in advance. Minutes will be posted soon after the meeting, so anyone can catch up. You'll be able to watch a recording as well. Any updates will be posted on that page, and I'll just pull it up now so you have it, so you know where it is. But go share this. Nope. I had it open, I swear.
I believe you.
I got it, it's all good.
There we go. Here we go. Sports Tourism Task Force. Looks like all of our other task force web pages. And so here's all the information. And so we'll start populating the calendar here. And you'll see the live stream link in the video will be posted and uploaded soon after.
Great. Thank you for putting that all together. As far as the meetings themselves, really, I like lively conversation. As I kind of said in our pre-work session, you guys are all the experts and I'm just kind of here to navigate everything with all the experts in the room. So I appreciate that. We will be using the Robert's rules as far as, just motions and kind of general discussion. I will recognize task force members to speak. And considering that we're dealing with this hybrid where we have some people in person and some people on the screen, going to kind of ask for some help on recognizing if somebody's trying to speak online, that we make sure we get a hold of everybody, give everybody an opportunity to make comments and be part of the discussion. So that's it from that standpoint. Any questions on any of that as we set up and get ready to roll? Okay, you're seeing no comments and I know we can see just some of the participants, but is there a way for us to see all of them? Absolutely. Okay, so as we work on that, we'll just kind of keep that going. To jump right in, and I know we've got 90 minutes here today. So as we talk about this, the task force was really created to develop a study, look at workforce development, and finally assess ways to improve marketing with sports tourism in Montgomery County. There's a lot of subsets to that, but that's basically the three buckets that we're working with. The study, as we determined, was the largest part and had the longest lead time. So that's where we decided to start today. Hopefully everybody got a copy of the packet with kind of really some base items and as far as the scope of work would be. The goal today is really to walk through that scope of work and make sure that we've got a full package to put together so that we can start working on the study. After that, then we will, as that is going on, we'll start talking about workforce development. We'll start talking about marketing and the other items that we have to cover. So as we get started and, working on the study and what we have to commission here, what I really wanted to start with is hopefully everybody had an opportunity to kind of review what was in the proposed study. And I'll start with this open question, and that is basically, does anyone have any additional areas? So before we go kind of from a procedural standpoint, we'll kind of go through each one of the buckets. But before we even get to the buckets, is there anything outside of what's listed in the draft study that anybody wants to throw on the table that we should be considering as far as the study goes? Out there. Is that everybody that's in the meeting?
Yes,
It is. Okay. Let's see if we're missing it. No. Give everybody a minute here just to review. If there's nothing from a major category, then I think what we should do is really start going through the different areas. And so let's start digging into then the market analysis and what is proposed. Again, what we're trying to do here is get the final scope of work so we can start procuring somebody to do the study and we can keep this the task force working on time. So from the market analysis, is there any comments on the details of the market analysis? Is there anything at all in regards to the verbiage that's in there or any suggested changes, anything that's missing? Susan?
Yeah, so I'm sorry, I'm playing catch up. I just saw Lal's email with the attachments. We are a sports tourism task force. Are we hoping that whatever the facility is could be suitable? I'm trying to read here, but tournament, league play, but suitable for multi-use, right? Somehow that it would be some level of a multi-use or evaluate the opportunity for a multi-use facility, right?
Yes,
So
So,
that, not only from the MCPS and MC point of view about having a place for commencements, but also in the notion of it might be useful for a concert venue, right? Or so that it could be lit more nights than less nights.
yeah, I think that's a good point. Well,
yeah, I think we probably wouldn't include that in the market analysis. And I think you're right that it's not really included in the case study, site suitability, feasibility, but that's where we would ask them that when they model or look for sites that it's consider, they would consider the possibility of multiple uses. But that's sort of like a public use, whereas the market analysis is maybe more focused on what the gaps are for sports specifically, and then using that to figure out, what the basis is for a facility, and then adding in multiple uses there. So I think that would come in potentially later, as well as the market study aspect of it, but.
it's almost like a subcategory after you lay out, and maybe this goes into, as you're getting into the final, Susan, maybe it's you kind of lay this out based on the sports and multi-sports use, what is needed there. And then maybe as we identify those, we can go back in and identify what other additional uses do you believe this facility could give. But I agree. I think that's kind of more of a secondary piece, and I'll welcome any other comments on that.
For the market analysis side, I think you should include, because we're talking about tourism
Yeah.
here, where people are coming from, economic impact to the community. As two items that you're gonna want to look at.
Agreed.
And maybe this isn't relevant to this section, but are we asking for some analysis on a facility that's wholly encapsulated indoors as opposed to a big soccer field?
That would come out of the study. So they will look at the various sports, which would include, indoor, outdoor, sort of, and then, whether there would be like a clubhouse or something involved. I think that just comes out of what they find in the gaps in the market study.
So, the notion is arena versus a field is what I'm trying to get at, right? And don't we want to know if an arena is of value or if it's just a field is of value? And where that gap is? Are we having them look at those range of options?
So, yeah, I'm trying to, Susan,
Okay.
I'm trying to figure out where that fits
Right,
into, is that in market analysis, or is that different, or is that, going back to the original question, is that a whole different kind of category to kind of analyze that?
Well, the market analysis is supposed to analyze what exists now.
Yes,
So not here and in other places.
okay,
What you're asking for is what the recommendations of the whole thing would be.
yeah.
So that's the goal, is for the end result after all of these things are done, is to tell us what we need to build.
Quick comment. So one of the things, Susan, to your point, which could be considered in a part of the market analysis or in its own section, is really the facility programming. So what is the community demanding in terms of programming? That would tell us what we need to build in terms of sports courts, fields, that sort of thing. So that could go into this part, or it could be really its own standalone section if we wanted it to be.
So isn't that covered under the trends and opportunities portion?
Could be. We could highlight it there.
We're looking at the participation, changing demographics, stakeholder interviews, things of that nature. Just trying to figure out if we're
Yeah.
duplicating, or is that covered kind of there?
It's somewhat, but if we're gonna really highlight and maybe it's not necessarily here, but if in terms of what you wanna build, you gotta know what what courts, what fields, what your infrastructure is going to look like. So what is that demand drive? I think they kind of intersect.
Yeah, just to zoom out for a quick second, because we had talked a little bit as we drafted this. One of the reasons that the order of operations is left sort of for discussion is partly for this reason. It's hard to do this sort of chicken and egg thing, right? Like, what do we need and what can we fit, right? So in terms of like, if it's an outdoor or indoor, that might have different dimensions and different requirements for site planning. So that will, inform what suitable sites there are. Or if you did it the other way around, where you had site suitability first, and then you kind of know what you're playing with, and that might limit what your options are. So that's definitely a part of the discussion. I wanted just to sort of present that for.
Yeah, so it sounds like, Susan, I think kind of what we're looking at here is potentially what you guys are mentioning is maybe almost a second phase after we get this initial analysis done is then what do we build, right? Really, kind of that then becomes a secondary question based on this report. Is that kind of the way we're seeing it, or?
Yeah, I mean,
If we don't have some way, and again, I apologize, I'm catching up on the homework here, so forgive me. And maybe I'm getting us ahead of the curve here. But I think in somewhere we have to have an opportunity, whether it's in this thing or the next thing, to sort of evaluate the notion of an actual arena thing where sports could be played as well as other activities could be efficiently carried out in a way that's meaningful and not weather dependent, right?
Yes, I understand what you're saying. I'm kind of feeling like that is really kind of a later phase of this. After we do this market analysis, and if I could go back to the market analysis part, and Matt, what you just mentioned, you mentioned a couple items that you think are missing in this, and that was
the economic impact, where people are coming from. But like the conversation that's happening now goes back to the concerns I raised initially. Are we talking about tourism, or are we talking about just community use? Because they're two very different things. And what you're talking about, Susan, is an approach that you already know what you want to build because you know what you want to use it for. We don't need this study for that. But if we want to talk about tourism and finding ways to get more people to come to this county to spend their money, we need to go with the study first. Let it tell us what we need to build. And then all the community use comes secondary to that.
correct.
Well, yes, I hear what you're saying, but if I could just add on, I don't think it's still sort of tourism related, right? Because the notion would be that there would be other uses, like you could have a concert there, right? And that would bring in more revenue for whoever's managing the arena and has control over the revenue assets, right? And you'd get more bang for your buck. So it is the very much sports and related to sports tourism. It's certainly related to the community use piece and how we might define that from leagues, local Montgomery County resident leagues having access to the space, as well as then how do you activate the space more broadly and, help create a sense of community and a sense of place in Montgomery County. And if you have another arena-like space, then, is that, sort of the third piece there, that it's not just, it could be sports during the day and then it'd be too small for Springsteen, but we all know our baseball parks, stadiums, host those kind of concerts now, right? And they're constantly looking for ways to drive revenue out of the ground that they have, right?
So Susan, I think from listening to the conversation, I think we're on the same page, right? And I think the scope of what we're looking at here is based on sports tourism. What's available, so as we talk about this market analysis, it's what's out there, what's needed from a sports standpoint. I think the second phase to this, if I would, is Susan, along those lines of, after you determine what's needed, what could fit in the county, what we can actually build, then you can go into a deeper dive and say, what are the sub-uses that can come out of that?
And in the assessment, it's not just what we have in the county, it's regional too.
Correct. So I think, any other comments on that?
I think we can add that to the case studies piece, certainly, and flesh that out to sort of say, like, once you've done this market study and we're looking at the types of facilities that we want to potentially model this after, we might want to look at facilities that also have multi-use and sort of serve non-sports purposes that, can serve a public use. And just to reorient you to the sort of preamble here, the notes for the task force, Susan, part of that is just to say that this study will focus primarily in the sports and sort of the technical aspects of this, but then it kind of comes back to you to decide and sort of weigh in on whether that's a useful council priority after the study is done. And it's sort of hard to add so many different aspects of their scope. We don't want to also do a gap analysis for the different types of performance arts venues that we need, because that will massively dilute the scope, but
Yeah.
certainly include that as a consideration for what the facility finally looks like, and we can beef up the language to do that.
That makes sense to me, if I understand you, that the market analysis needs to do, as we've described here, for all the reasons we've discussed, but helping them with some more background about the broader scope of the conversation that we're having in the community writ large, whether it's at the council or people in the community, et cetera, right? That helps me give them, I think adding that context is helpful to the market analysis that we're giving them.
We can add it to the case studies and make it fleshed out.
Thank you. That makes
Darren,
sense to me.
I'll appreciate you putting your hand up. I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, thank you. I just want to flag a couple things that I think are really important. One is I think it could be a useful data point on the market demand, that there's a market demand for other things like graduation venues and things like that. So I just think that could be part of the market demand. And I really do want to pause on the point that Matt is making, so that we're all to find out if we're all in accord on it. And I think there's this notion that if you have a bucket, you put your big rocks in first, and then you fit your small rocks and pebbles and gravel and then water around the big rock. And I think the point that Matt is making is that the big rock here is tourism, right? Revenue driving visitors from out of county. And that if we can fit some community use, smaller rocks around it, great. And I think before we proceed down that path with that assumption, I think we should make sure that we're all interrogating it. And it may be right. I can also imagine a scenario where we get down the road with this study and we end up proposing, or the consultant or the committee ends up proposing a pretty significant public investment of funds for something that is primarily a sports tourism function, and find that there isn't broad-based community support for that. There might not be council support for that. And so I just wonder that if trying to fit two large rocks in at the same time is truly impractical and truly will result in failing to achieve either goal, or if indeed that's something that could be accomplished with the right sort of planning and intent. And so I want to flag that. I think it's important that we pause for a moment and flag that, because it seems to me a very important philosophical and frankly political choice. And I just want to make sure we're airing that before we go too much further into that assumption.
Any comments directly on that? Tom, I know you have your hand raised, so I kind of turn it to you next. I'm not sure if your comment was in response to Darren or if you have a different comment.
Well, I had a different comment, but I basically think Darren's point's more important than mine was going to be, so I'm going to reinforce that. Exactly what I heard Darren say was what I believe, which is we have to fundamentally understand community use and its integration from the get-go, and not do it as we want sports tourism. And then if anything else helps, if anything else fits in, then we can. I mean, several of us were around when forget the history, the political reality of if you commit to certain thing and there's not an outsized acknowledgement and plan to provide demonstrated value to the community level, politically it may not get through, whether it's good or not to do. So good point, Darren. I'm all in. I would also just say that my specific point was is much smaller, is in the market analysis. My sense is there are elements related to the sort of overall environment, small e environment, such as the synthetic fields in high schools or elsewhere discussion, that if a policy were to be enacted, Jeff is probably like, oh my God, he's bringing up synthetic fields. But the idea that is a significant source of support for major sports tourism, meaning practice facilities and ability to extend, say, a broader, to grow an event. If you like outgrow a particular place, you need other places. And if the policy conversation in the county is happening separate and distinct, but would have huge impact on, say, the physical inventory and the capacity to deliver, then the market analysis should include that.
Couple of good points here. So let's kind of, Jeff, I see you got your hand up there. I'll kind of turn it to you, see which, and we'll try and maybe frame this back a little bit.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just wanted to piggyback on some of the points that were made with the existing conditions. I think it's important to really look at the programming. I'll just speak for MCPS and the impact of the high school campus and the ability for us to actually run our programming on those campuses. The reality is we can't. We're utilizing middle schools, elementary schools, various park fields already to conduct practices and to run just our program, and then looking at the impact of the community use. So I think as much as this is, of course, about the sports tourism, we have to look at the existing facilities and the bandwidth of those facilities to meet the needs of programming. And I'll just use Girls Flag because it's front and center right now in the media, and of course we're launching it and piloting it, and it's going to be here to stay. I mean, there's safe to say that. We're already having calls for junior varsity, middle school. And so how does that, and just using that as an example, how do we, on our current fields and structures, incorporate that programming into what we have? And so I think as part of this, the existing conditions needs to be, the current state of affairs. When we look at the indoor facilities, I know I'm jumping to that now, but the fact that we're running our entire indoor track program down in Prince George's County. And so the existing condition being that there is a facility there that's being utilized by our programming, and I'm sure there's other programming. So looking at that current state and what the bandwidth is, I know there's 90 football fields, and there's a number of different big rocks that we need to hit as part of this existing condition analysis. To see what the current state is and what we're trying to accomplish between MCPS, parks, rec, right, and then the community use aspect, and then what would be available for the tourism, and then utilizing that as we move forward with the gap analysis.
Yeah, I think it's so. So basically, what we're dealing with here is we're dealing with sports tourism and the facility assessment. But we're contemplating the two big rocks, and going back to Darren's point, if you put two big rocks in there, you're kind of combining what is the need of the community as it exists and what gaps are missing in that as we sit and analyze our current facilities, in addition to what is needed outside for sports tourism and to attract. So the question is really, do we think that we can put that into this part of the category in a market analysis in a way that emphasizes the both to get the biggest piece of this is sports tourism and attracting what's needed out there? Is there a mix there, and how do we evaluate that as part of that part of the market analysis?
I mean,
So
I've made my opinion on this very clear, and
Yep.
I appreciate Derek bringing it up. I don't think you can put two big rocks in the bucket and make this work. Yeah, when you do this analysis, you're going to see nobody does it that way. What you're talking about from a sports tourism standpoint is an investment, which is revenue generating for the county, as opposed to internal programming, which is an operator loss for the county. Like parks isn't profitable, rec isn't profitable. They're not designed to be profitable. They're two very different things. And we're trying to solve both problems with one pool of money, and you're not going to do either well.
Yeah, without, I'm trying to weigh in on the debate, but just to make the point that this scope of work is what's going out to the consultant. It's not the scope of work for the task force.
Yeah, that's true.
And so
Yeah.
as we think a little bit about the procurement and the types of consultants that we're looking at, the real expertise that we want is that sort of economics expertise, whereas the community use piece is not really suitable for the type of consultants that would do the majority of this scope. And so And part of that also is that like, I think from the community and public use piece, like the government, the experts, the agency representatives probably have a better sense of how to do that, or would have a different scope for how to assess that. And that's not really what this was intended to do, and it's not designed that way. I don't know how easily we could expand the scope while also sticking to the sort of technical aspects of what we're trying to do here, which is measure costs and do site measurements and things like that. So if we open up, we're gonna kind of go beyond the expertise potentially of our consultants, but also like, do we need a consultant to weigh in and on that aspect?
So I have a question or a thought. So during this process, wouldn't some of the comments that were just made surface to the table with the consultant in the focus groups and the discussions in the community? Oh, by the way, we can't accommodate this, or we have to take flag football into Prince George's County. Like, wouldn't they be hearing that, and wouldn't that be part of the whole
Yes.
process for the consultant to say, oh, and PS, we've learned these other things about what is needed in the community aside from what we're unable to host, or what Matt can't host, or things we're turning down. It would surface and it would be part of the conversation, and I'm assuming the consultant would put that into whatever the report comes out.
We can require them to do that certainly, and they would obviously engage, but also I think we kind of did pass the kickoff thing, which there was a question about what's all the information, data analysis
Well,
that you
yeah.
provide ahead of time, and some of that could be like, here are the gaps for the
Yep.
community facilities that we know that we have, whether it's indoors or whatever, and that's sort of like, you need to consider this as we move through the technical study.
Well, yeah, I'd like to kind of summarize those couple of points to the group and just see if there's any additional comments there as we kind of keep this moving. And I think as we look at the market analysis, and again, we just want to make sure everything is covered in there. The point is, and I think Bilal is making it, is that, this is the study, this is what's going out to the consultant. They are not going to do our job, right? As the Sports Tourism Task Force, it's our job to kind of take this whole conversation we're having here today and figure out how all those pieces fit. The question then is, in the kickoff portion of it, which is all the data that we're going to give to the consultant, do we feel that that will be covered with the data that we give? So the point about the synthetic turf fields, the studies on what's going on and what's been done locally in the work there, the needs in the rec department, and I'm sure you guys have reports and facility assessments and needs, and if we provide that all to the consultant to consider in their market analysis and in this report, are they going to get a lot of that background information there to help kind of consider these parts as they look at the whole system, not only in the county, but also in the region. Any thoughts on that? Is everybody kind of comfortable with that and understanding that they're not doing our job, that the kind of conversation that's being raised is what we have to do, and the consultant's report is a tool for us to be able to have that conversation? Thoughts?
I have a quick thought on that.
Yeah.
I think, so one of the things I'm hearing too, between the Darren, your big rocks and small rocks is sticking with everybody. But so this initial assessment, what it will eventually do is inform the POR. And so a thought here, and as I'm thinking, I'm thinking about all the community meetings I've sat in for different PORs. And one person that comes to mind, she'd probably hate that I bring her name up to give the thought of giving somebody more work, but Ronnie Warner from DGS is pretty informed in this area. And so I think it may be worth it, at least to have her in the back pocket as somebody that we can consult. But she deals with consultants all the time. She deals with setting up community meetings and doing those assessments and helping determine what things should be built. So she may have some expertise on guiding the scope that could inform a future POR is what I'm hearing. And so that's just a thought.
Thank you. And Darren, go ahead, back to you.
Yeah, I think, so I appreciate everybody's conversation and Matt's point as well. And like I said, I mean, that may be 100% right. And I'm looking at this this scope of work, and I'm wondering if really my question falls into the financial feasibility analysis. And if we could include some commentary there that says, you know, assess the degree to which the tourism aspect, which is to say the out-of-town visiting sports, must be prioritized at all costs to make this thing work. Versus, no, if you kind of 80% maximize that or 60% maximize that in terms of priority, you could make ends meet, because the math has to work. To Matt's point, the math has to work, and if it doesn't work, what are we doing here, right? And no amount of community goodwill is going to balance out the fact that the thing doesn't pay for itself, or doesn't make that sort of doesn't make profit, doesn't make good economic sense. So I guess my question would be in that final feasibility analysis, could we ask the consultant the degree to which this is, you know, a slam dunk with lots of extra wiggle room to have a fairly large community access rock in there, or no, there's really one room for one rock, and it's tourism and youth sports. And I just think that just having that data would help me be comfortable with the approach that I think maybe we're moving right. But I think Matt has access to data that I don't have, and maybe there'd be an opportunity to include that in the scope here.
Yeah, that's easy to include. You know, we think, and part, this is very basic language. So yeah, having multiple scenarios, making sure that the feasibility and the site suitability, frankly, accounts for the public use and community use and compares that against not having it and what the differences are, and giving that, as information to evaluate. Yeah, that we can definitely do that.
I think that'd be great.
Yeah, I double, triple echo Darren there, that I think sort of understanding what's financially feasible and what could be done totally by the private sector, and then what could be added on for more public sector uses within that frame. And that, because then the county can make an analysis like, well, we could invest this much of the public dollars into this to make these things work, right? And we've created leverage. In other words, the county didn't have to pay for all of it, but we're paying a portion of it to get community use out of it as well, right? Trying to create that larger win-win for our overall economy, as well as access to this. So I think maybe that's where we sort of tackle that. I agree with Dylan, and that having that in that section would then give us that groundwork to do our homework later, really tackling the other aspects of this that we know that our leaders want to be able to achieve, is some larger win-wins here with such a facility.
Yeah, and I'll go back on that and just emphasize to the group that is going to be part of our final report, right? That's the debate. So we just want to make sure. So is everybody in agreement with Darren's request that we get that clarification in the financial? I know we jumped a little bit, but in the financial feasibility analysis to get that little bit of clarity. And Darren, again, to reiterate there, basically what you're looking at is based on this facility, what of it, how much of it, does it have to be 100% tourism based in order to be successful? Or, as long as you've got 60% of the programming is tourism based, and then you can have 40% free time or whatever for community use. Am I framing that correctly?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
So
What's the wiggle room?
I don't think that needs to be in it. That's for us to decide. Like the point of the
From a financial standpoint, though.
I get what you're saying, but my point is, we're asking this consultant to come in and say, this is what's going to cost to build X facility because that's what the market says you should build.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's up to us to say, well, we know we can get this much out of it from a tourism side. That gives us this much room. So that should be the county's investment side. They're just there to tell us what it's going to cost to build it. And then it's for us to decide how we want to split that up. Do we just want to say, hey, let's go find somebody that's going to privately fund it 100%, and then it's not going to be used for community use, or we want X piece of this to be community use, so we're going to put this much money in, someone else has to pay the rest, or we're going to pay for all of it. Like that's the side the task force should be doing, not the consultant. They're just here to tell us this is what the market says you should build, and here's what it's going to cost to build it.
But can't part of the study include financial analysis and recommendations?
Well, because I'm looking at the one that I have from Fort Worth right now. They say what should be built, what they estimate will be the revenue coming out of this for the next, I have 5 years in front of me. So, and then Fort Worth is right now deciding how are they going to pay for it themselves? Are they going to have somebody else come in and do it? That's how they're approaching this. I think that's the best way. So then you can build in your community use if you want, or if you just want this to be a revenue driver for the county, that's what it is.
Terry,
Yeah, I hear you, Matt, but I also think that, like, if you go to SFA today, Sports Facility Advisor, where Matt certainly knows and Terry knows it, I work closely with them. They say consistently, if you don't put into the plan up front with the study, what is your expectation for community use? There's some sense of, well, then they maximize it out, but then they have they don't know how much is the VIG, how much is, they're not articulating what it would be the difference, because if it came back and said, well, this is what you could make for 100%, you had no community use, it's a different conversation than if you said we at the front end wanted some community use and we would like to understand, because it's not a one black and white, well, there's no money that comes from associated with community use. It's all, it just feels to me like we're trying to make it more simple than it is. And good consultants can insert and input different feedback that will make the decision. I hear you loud and clear. We need to make the policy decision. But if we just say, how much does it cost to build and what's the maximum we can make, I feel like we're leaving some insight on the table.
Agreed.
Terry, if I could maybe call on you to, as you've done a number of these studies and so on and so forth, and you listen to this conversation, is there any pitfalls or recommendations you have in kind of this discussion part?
Wow, yeah, nothing like listening in and that. So I do hear the points being made by all participants thus far. I do think and believe that if you get your scope too broad and the like, you're going to end up with a rainbow of fruit colors kind of study that's going to tell you a lot of information, but it's going to help you drive towards no ultimate outcome. I think there needs to be some focus in on, and I use Darren's words, the rocks. I do believe that there needs to be a big rock and maybe a medium rock. I don't think two big rocks can fit into the bucket, really. But like I said, this is called the Sports Tourism Task Force. So I think tourism is the big rock, and then community use is the medium rock. And I do think to Matt's point is that, I think we have to be very vigilant about what are we trying to identify here. And if tourism is the thing you're going to identify, then that needs to be I'll call it the 80% focus of the outcome of the study, is what is in the need for the sport tourism piece. But I do think a good consultant, to Tom's point, can decipher some of the feel good of what is missing in the market and what is some of the shortcomings of the current offerings, so that we can have a nice bigger picture of how does sport tourism support maybe then the growth of some of the missing pieces of the equation.
And so would you put that into the financial feasibility part of it, or where would you put that in that study?
I'm going to go more on the market analysis part.
Okay. And can I ask you a little bit deeper how? What would you recommend there that we're missing in our?
So in my experience for the last 16 years in Maryland is, the work that we're trying to do as a task force is trying to identify exactly what we're asking someone to identify and do for us. And the fact of the matter is, we ask them to do so much, and I don't know how big our pot of money is to ask this group to do what we're asking them to do. I don't know if it's $10 or $50 million. So my only reservation to the group is that we have to identify this scope as tightly as possible, so that we don't have, or whatever we hire or whoever we hire doesn't go off on a whirlwind tour and present something to us that is not realistic to what the county is expecting in return. Like I'm still kind of confused as to what are we truly trying to accomplish as a collective whole? Is it by name of the task force? What is missing for Montgomery County in the sports tourism space? And if so, then that's what we need to be laser focused in on and the like. But if it's going to be the sport tourism and missing assets, then we need to maybe redefine what this task force is being charged to do. Because I don't think we're going to be able to serve, going back to Matt's point, we cannot serve, with full clarity 2 masters at one time with the scope of what we're asking this company to do, unless we got a big bucket of money that I'm unaware of.
Yeah, I agree, and thanks for that, Terry. I think a lot of good points.
Just a couple of points on procedure here, and I think just to sort of come in the middle here, I think if you use the metaphor of the rocks, I think that market analysis is really about what does that sports tourism rock look like, and that's really what that is geared towards. And just so you know, again, part of this, the way we structured this was we were thinking that as they would work through this linearly, a lot of consultants will, start working on different aspects of a scope at once. But we really would I think the approach would be that they would focus on one so that we can inform how they move on to that next step. So that market analysis, like I said, would really help identify that sports tourism rock. And then once they come and they tell us, okay, it could be flag football, it could be cricket, it could be pickleball, it could be whatever. And then it's sort of like, okay, what kind of facilities, and we would help guide them and what case studies to pick that have that emphasis and maybe also have a community use or just like really super successful as sports tourism facilities on their own. And then we would help limit what they research. We would help limit also what that facility looks like. So, and I think that the consultant actually would provide value in running some numbers on feasibility for community use, because that's not actually that much more difficult. It's just sort of a different assumptions in their model, but they don't really need to do all that market analysis work to do it, because it's just sort of like we could compare a stadium versus something that has more of an indoor infill kind of flexible use kind of thing, and so it's more like they're just running numbers, whereas the market analysis has this sort of qualitative aspect about what's the right sports tourism use. And so I'm just saying that I think systematically those case studies, suitability analysis, financial feasibility, a little more quantitative, a little more discrete and easy to test multiple scenarios, which the task force could inform. I don't know if that's helpful. I just want to put that out there. So
Yeah, I think it is, and I think we're kind of what we're talking about again, and what we keep going back to is kind of like, what's our role? This thing isn't going to be just, I think Kelly mentioned it before. It's not like you're going to turn it over to a group and then they're just going to go away and then come back. There's going to be interactions with that group throughout, and we've got to go. But I think Terry raised a good point, and Matt's raised it a couple of times too, and that is, what is the task force? And maybe we need to kind of back up here a second and just kind of get back to that a little bit. As I read, the council and the task force itself, the task force will conduct a facility needs assessment, which will include assessing a viability of multi-use facility that can increase sports capacity in the county, but also potentially serve as a facility for events like high school graduations. The task force will also identify workforce development related to sports tourism in the county, and finally, the task force will assess and improve marketing. So I think that the point is, and I think Terry, you kind of raised this, and I think we've kind of been discussing. And Matt, you said your point where you sit on this. The task force is primarily about sports tourism. And I think that's where we've got to remain, is about sports tourism. And then I think as we get through this process, and as we get a consultant on board and we start looking at different things, then we can start assessing from there. Okay, well, how do we plug in community use? How do we plug in these different things? And what is the offshoot of that? But and I want to throw that out for discussion, because I think we need to, as a committee, come around in agreement to that, because that's going to help answer some of these questions, rather than doing the stance of, well, it's about community use first, and then it's about sports tourism second. I think what I'm reading, as far as what we are charged with, it's about sports tourism first. We have an agreement on that, or is there any discussion on that? Thanks for the thumbs up.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that. I think Terry said large rock, medium rock, or, you know, I think I just would, I didn't want the community use to get lost, or I wanted us to all say, that's not what this is about, right? And I think this discussion is really healthy and helpful. And I think I have a sense of where the group is, that it's not out, but it's first and foremost, this is sports tourism. But we don't want to totally lose the community use. And I don't know, maybe case studies are a cheap way to assess that. No, in fact, there's never been a successful balance. So just throwing that out there.
Can I ask a point of clarification on this? And I know Terry and Matt are particularly involved in the sports ETA, the trade association. Just the definition of the word tourism, I think it would help just to understand. Does that imply, are we talking heads in beds? Are we talking out of town as a nature, and out of town can be out of county, which is just here for the day, or out of town and staying over? Or are we talking about money itself? Because there's a lot of folks that can spend a lot of money within the county or even on a day trip that may or may not. I'm just trying to get my head around, does sports tourism in your mind mean something related to heads in beds, or is it more broadly just money around sports events, which is a much broader discussion?
Well, I'd say from sports ETA standpoint, we look at it as visitors from more than 90 miles. Because if you have a visitor within county, and yeah, they're still spending money, but it's just placing money what they would spend elsewhere in the county. So typically it's 90 miles. Heads and beds is an important part, but we've started to expand that definition to media coverage, social media impact, community legacy projects, things like that. So it's a lot more to it than just heads and beds at this point. But the overarching thing is the economic benefit side of it.
So just for the point, and Matt, you know, you and I know each other, that there is another element of, you can say, well, it's not 90 miles, because if you take all the money that people are in the county today, leaving the county, taking their money elsewhere, if you provide opportunity for them here, that is economic benefit to the county, much less other benefits. So just, again, you guys know more about this than I do, particularly from what I understand. I know Terry and Matt, and I know that's what they do, but so I'm not the expert, but I do think there is, at least let's just have a clear understanding that money is money. And if we're capturing money to stay in county as a result of a high quality sports set of experiences that would otherwise go out of county, I just think we should be clear on whether that's part of it or not. If we decide that's not it, by definition, that's not tourism, that's something else, fair enough. I'm not going to fall on my sword, but I do feel like the conversation often in this, as I've, you know, in my work around the country, that subject, when I'm testifying before a county council, comes up all the time. Is it just people from out of town, or is it money that we would not have otherwise had in county?
It's both.
I think.
It's both, but also remember, an out of area visitor is worth probably 3 to 4 times of an in-county visitor from a spending standpoint. Because your in-county visitors not going to restaurants, they're going back home to eat. They're not going to retail. They're not staying in a hotel, so they're not spending that much money when they stay in county.
But I'd also add to that point, Tom, and I think you raised a really good point. I would also add to that point that you know, I think that is, I look at it as another benefit to the community, right? As people, and I think everybody in this room has been involved with sports and youth sports at some point. And God, if I got to go to Howard County again for another event, you know what I mean? I think that's an offshoot, right? Is the fact that you've built this facility, so there is a local benefit embedded right in there in the sports tourism point, is that now that you have the facility in your county, there's residents of the county that no longer have to leave the county to go travel to an event. Like Jeff is saying, Jeff, I was shocked to hear that all of our track and field items are happening in Prince George's County. I mean, that's just amazing to me, is that that's happening. So that right away, if there's a business model and that's the recommendation, there's a benefit to the community. Tom, I think is kind of what you're capturing there, and I think that's a natural progress. And Susan, you've had your hand up there. Turn it to you.
Just two quick things. I would echo Tom's point that I think while it's probably not as much money for the families that stay in county, there is some money there to be acknowledged and captured. So I hope we capture that not only from a revenue perspective, but also from a community benefit perspective, as you described. I'll just say anecdotally, when my son played up at the Soccerplex, I then took myself to the outlet up there, which I would not have otherwise done because I live all the way down county and I wouldn't have spent my money up there had I not been up there for that. The other thing I would say is I do think, as we've talked about earlier, that maybe the market analysis doesn't have to do the big rock and the medium rock, but I do think in the financial feasibility, I do think we have to have some understanding of what maybe Darren called our wiggle room, right? If there's absolutely no wiggle room for community use to make this work, we need to know that at the outset. And if there's some wiggle room, what is that wiggle room and how much would it in theory cost us to deliver that, right? And I don't know if my kids' travel team playing in Montgomery County instead of Howard or on the Eastern Shore is a community use, or if it falls under tourism. But in any case, the feasibility study's got to give us some indicator of what wiggle room we have to work as a commission to think about how we do all the things that the decision makers are really sort of interested in.
My last comment, I don't know if it's, I'm just going to say it. I'm definitely, my view is slanted from the perspective that I have since I grew up working in Prince George's County, where they ran the Prince George's County Sports and Learning Complex, where we go to send our track, because I too send Maryland Senior Olympics to Prince George's County because we can't host it here. I've held many events at Showplace Arena, held events at Bowie Bay Sox Stadium, all owned by Department of Parks and Recreation, Prince George's County. So I definitely have a perspective that comes from doing both, and I'll say that. And I'll say my historical knowledge of Sports and Learning Complex, and this is just certainly hand me down, passed down, spent a lot of years there, was that they had to come back and backtrack with the community piece. And I'm not saying at a large scale it should be this huge component of this, but I do know they spent a lot of time backtracking how to figure that piece out. So I'm not sure it should be done on the back end, or we're going to find ourselves in the same dealing with the same issues that they did. But they do have enterprise division that does, obviously they fly horses in from all over the world to Showplace Arena, but then there might be an extreme teams event there on a Friday night that's not being used otherwise, and they have pretty fairly large concerts there. They hold high school graduations there at Showplace Arena. So they do have a multitude of facilities that have figured out how to balance both, but it may be worthwhile. And maybe the consultant can tell us. Maybe the consultant could say, yeah, you should consider this on the front end. Or maybe they say, like what you're saying, no, this belongs in a different study in a different place. Maybe the answer lies with the folks. I know they'll do what we pay them to do ultimately, but maybe they'll have some insight. I mean, there's certainly some consultants that deal with, the similar types of things, and they may be able to give us some direction.
Yeah, and just so I'm clear, I'm not saying that the facility can only be one or the other.
Right.
I'm saying you have to go into it, one is the priority. It's like, we're the same boat. We actually weren't built for tourism. We were built for community use at the Soccerplex.
They would tell you have to plan for both in Prince George's County, hands down. I'm just saying, that was my point.
My point is, like, the priority has to be one or the other, and then you fill your gaps with the other. So if you're going in with sports tourism in mind, you're trying to maximize the number of tourism-based events you can in the year, which is not going to be every weekend and every week, and then you fill in the gaps.
And I'm not in a disagreement, but I'm just saying that the planning for the other piece has to coincide with that and can't necessarily come on the back end. That's just my thought, but I think I've belabored that point. So I'll, leave it there and just,
Okay. So, all right, so I'm gonna get back to here. We've got about 30 minutes left. And so I just want to get back to, and that was a great discussion. Thank you, everybody. I think we've, as a group, have got a lot of clarity there in that we are focused on sports tourism. We are not going to forget the community use as we go through, but basically everything we're doing is based on sports tourism. So I'm gonna go back to, kind of the proposal that's laying out here, and just open it up again for comment to areas that we think are missing. I know we've come to an agreement on the financial feasibility analysis that we're gonna kind of get that measurement of how much tourism versus non-tourism. We're gonna kind of add that into that discussion piece. Is there anything else that is in the market analysis and the case studies and the site suitability analysis? And then I think we can end with kind of maybe this start, what are we giving to them? Kind of that bucket that you kind of the kickoff, and what kind of data are we giving to them? But any comments on that? And Matt, I want to go back to, you had made a comment earlier in the beginning of this whole conversation about market analysis and something there. And I just want to make sure we captured that, or we didn't capture that.
Yeah, if we're looking at existing facilities, what their economic impact is, where are people coming from? So we get a gauge of, if we build something else, more than likely you're going to get the same drive distance and fly distance for events.
So in the market analysis, where are people coming from, and what is the economic impact?
Yeah, geographic characteristics. Yeah, and I think, did we say that already?
No.
It is, it was in there.
Yeah, let's see it.
Yeah, I mean, we have sort of data-driven approach. We can flesh out what that means, sort of get specific analyses to do and.
Okay.
The one thing I'd add on that we do a lot of work. I do a lot of work with is the ability for the analysis to predict future. So obviously, right now, flag football is one thing. 2 years from now, flag football will be a completely different thing. But what's beyond flag football? Pickleball. Those are the two most obvious. Everybody's talking about that. Just to make sure that we ask at least for their, and they may be coming to me because that's what we give a lot of this data to these kind of consultants on this about the future participation. But sometimes let's not just look at the static, what the market is. And I know they would never just say they would, but sometimes they do. Let's really ask them, what is your understand? Give us the best you can do on the predictive quality of demand 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. Sounds obvious, but you got to really press them on it, because that's a harder thing to do than to say, here's what the number is and we're going to extrapolate it out from right here. That's not predictive analysis. That's just an algorithm. Two different things.
And I thanks Tom on that. And so I think that goes into that gap analysis.
Well, I would say it's the trends and opportunities, and you somewhat have it in there. The top of the second page, last paragraph, to the extent which growing sports create demand for tournaments, league play. And then under that, providing facilities to meet demand for growing sports.
But also,
I would extrapolate that out a little more to what Tom's talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of go a little deeper into that.
We should also try to account for it maybe in some of the information that we provide up hand, is that we have great data that's, projections and sort of forecasts that comes from Tom's shop, and we should connect them.
Yeah.
Or tires.
And anything else on the proposed study language? Anything that's missing in the case studies or any of the other areas? I kind of throw it out there.
Keith, did you want to discuss the data, or should we maybe ask the people to think about it and return in 2 weeks with a list of things that they would want to maybe compile for the kickoff?
Yeah, I think that's well, let's see here. We got to do this, and then we got to kind of talk about the procurement piece a little bit. That's probably
Which might change. Yeah,
that might take a little while. So yeah, so as far as this whole discussion and the scope of work, now that everybody's got it, if you guys can take a look at the data that you have that you think might be useful to the study, can we have you reach out to Bilal on that and kind of share anything that you think would be good for the consultants?
Yeah, if you could start maybe just like itemizing, bulleting out, or sending things that you have. That could be data, but also studies that you've done recently, reports that you've written, whatever it is that is a useful resource. And certainly from the agencies, if you're doing facility planning and analysis, or that's recently done, that would be really useful. So if we could start maybe compiling, sending me a list, and then we can, try to put all that together.
So, any other, Kelly?
I was just gonna make a comment about that, including turn down business. And why?
Yeah, sure. Is that data that you have?
No, but the facility should.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you.
Oh, I see, like.
We have that
yeah,
from, believe it
okay.
or not, the conference center.
Okay,
Matt will have it. Park should have probably a database of what they've turned down and why they're turning it down, meaning they didn't have enough space, they didn't have the dates. That's really important to, for the study, so they can see what demands are and needs are.
do you have that, Park? Just want to confirm.
Or in recreation too.
That's gonna be DGS for recreation mostly. I mean, we
Yeah.
have, I
Oh,
mean,
sorry.
mining data is hard for us. We can certainly try.
It's hard for us too. The system we use is challenging. It's the same system.
Is that,
But
is that
to
what?
clarify,
Well, I'm sorry, Darren, if I could, would that fall under cups? Is that where they try and secure your guys' facilities?
it's
Is that
cup,
where that would be?
it's cup for county stuff and it's parks for park stuff.
Oh, it is, okay.
Yeah, it's all active Montgomery, but yeah.
Okay.
But I couldn't tell from the camera who asked the question about turn down.
Kelly.
Kelly,
But Kelly, to clarify that ask is a great point. That's not just for what we perceive to be out of town. That's just total, like where demand exceeds capacity
Well,
for our facilities. Yeah.
If you're interested in community use, then I think it's important for community use also to know what you're
Yeah.
losing.
Yeah, because that's not a really distinction that we can necessarily draw. We don't know who we're turning down necessarily.
Well, I misunderstood the question. I apologize, but there was a study recently done, OLR report that studied community use, and they extracted. Now the data's a bit old, but they'll be able to tell you what the community use issues were and raised by the community.
I think your more point is when people apply for a permit, they said we.
Yeah,
they
and
turn down.
that was part of it. It looked at community use across the board. It looked at, pulled all the permit data that they could that was accessible. But to Darren's point, mining that data is 3 different departments in the same system, in a system that is not working that great right now to mine data from. I'm just putting that out there.
Yeah, but we can scratch some stuff together from parks.
Even if it's maybe anecdotal, some way to maybe put it together in a rigorous, semi-rigorous way, but just even if it's not comprehensive, but we can talk about that. I mean, it'd be useful to get that perspective and from the conference center or whatever business.
Right. I mean, I think we already heard from
And the college, Susan, too. Yeah.
I don't know that we get that many requests for that, but I can certainly ask. I do think anecdotal data would be useful. What we might not, because you have to go into the permitting system, you might not get like the local travel team that was tasked with trying to create a tournament here in the county, because they went into the permitting system and kind of figured out you can't bring the softball World Series here because I can't get my hands on enough fields, right? You might not get that sort of local residents trying to bring sports tourism here, but certainly the bigger ones, like, you said you moved the seniors tournament. I know I sent the seniors tournament to Prince George's. Those things I think would certainly be very helpful to know. And yes, I can ask my colleagues if we have any anecdotal information about field use and see if we have any kind of turn down information. Sure.
so any thoughts on any additional information that if you could just share that over the next couple of weeks and we can start putting that together. I think as we close out this part of the discussion, it sounds like we've got a couple of things to modify on the scope, which we can work on and get back to the task force to try and really kind of finalize this out. But I think we've got a good footprint in that regards. The next piece is how we're going to procure this study, because we know the timeline, and this is evidently information that we need to continue our discussion as a task force. So how are we going to procure this? And then over.
Yeah, so did a lot of research on this, and so there's a few things we can do. Obviously, Terry has raised the state as a potential resource. But there's a question of where we would fall in line in terms of all the other studies that MSA and their consultants are working on. And then making sure that our scope is even in line with what MSA might support. And so those are some open questions, and it creates a little bit of risk of potentially going down that avenue, particularly with the time, but it is potentially an option to explore. Probably the most efficient option at this point is, and this is legally viable, we can ride Parks and Planning's contract, specifically Planning's economic on-call bench. They have pre-approved consultants, national and local, that focus on feasibility and market studies. And they're great. I used to manage it when I was at Planning. And because we can ride their contract, we don't have to put out an RFP. We would simply put out the task order. They'll respond within whatever time frame we specify and give us a price estimate, and then Planning would pay them and we would pay Planning. So there's a lot of benefits to that. It's a lot faster. So that's basically an option. The one outstanding item is obviously we don't actually have any money yet. So we would have to make a request to the county council to appropriate it. I had one more point on the cricket piece, but Terry, I don't know if you just want to weigh in real quick on the sports aspect of procurement, or the skate aspect of the skate.
Yeah, further, I want to, does the planning group have the ability to bring in subcontractors, meaning if
Yes.
so, group, you have a bunch of people lined in your system to be able to utilize, will one of those people be able to say that they're going to sub out to a group that maybe be more expertise in sports tourism?
Yes, so subcontracting is allowed, and I think honestly we could even include that as our suggestion to the consultants, that if you could incorporate some sports specific folks into your scope so that we have that and all that. I mean, we can do that. Maybe we can even connect them potentially with your bench that you have.
Yeah, I'm just talking about because to make sure they're getting some guidance from some expertise. They might have all the other scope of responsibility right at their disposal, but getting that, having like basically what your team look like is your bench going to include someone who has knowledge and expertise in this various space.
So they don't have a specific sports within that bench, but we can absolutely ask within the qualifications that, do you have sports experience? So they'll definitely list that project experience. And it's like, if you don't, do you have, relationships with the consultant or expert on that topic? And if not, would you be willing to maybe subcontract with someone that we recommend as well? So we can kind of put that out there and see what they come back with. But some of the national firms will very likely have done this, like the HRNAs, RCL, because of the world probably have. And they may even just cite those examples specifically, but absolutely we should.
Can you share that list of firms with Terry and I? Because we can vet them pretty quickly about what they've done and what they have in the space.
Yeah, I think I can probably list them, but we would have to procure it ourselves, and it would be competitive based on who responds. And so,
well, I'm saying,
I guess maybe I'll ask.
if none of them on that list have ever worked in the space, I don't know if this is the best way to go.
Right.
Is what my recommendation.
Right, sure. Yeah.
And then the other question would be, if they've got a bench of multiple, can we ask several of them to give us a proposal? And then this way we can compare even
I think we would have to.
people on the bench. Well, so I'm trying to make sure, I don't know how that procurement is set up. That's all.
Yeah, it's set up so basically they have, like, let's say it's approximately 10 consultants that do this work, and they are kind of bucketed into like market study feasibility, but there's multiple are listed in multiple buckets. But yeah, you'd have to put it out. You couldn't pick one, so you'd have to put it out and see who responds and pick from that.
Yeah.
We couldn't prioritize. We can't do a sole source, certainly with the amount that we're talking about. And in Planning's contract, sole source is like limited to like 30,000. So that's just not, that's a no-go. So it would have to be sort of evaluating the creds that they put in their task force response or task order response. But yeah, we can absolutely share the list just so but like, again, those they have done similar studies for Planning, and nationally those were part of it. We can even try to get some of their applications so that we know what credentials they have. So.
Yeah, and I think if we share that with the group, who the 10 consultants are, I think I think to Matt's point, there's a lot of expertise on this task force. So just being able to set out and say, well, look, that group's not even going to be blah, 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 but maybe even identifying.
I don't want to promise it, just because there may be a legal loophole to the extent that they're over there. So we want to make sure that we can even get that information, and share it to evaluate here. So let me figure it out. And we don't have a contract to ride yet with planning. So it's like, we haven't even asked. So it's just an option.
Okay. Information.
It's gotta be.
BGS may
But
have
there's some
something.
competitive information in like what we're talking about in terms of like the calls and stuff. So,
Right,
yeah, I guess the contract.
The list of vendors is
Yeah.
public information.
Yeah, we can get the contract.
Yeah.
And
We want to
that-
give them a heads up.
And that's another good point is who does DGS?
DGS.
Have
Yeah,
on
sure.
call? That might be another thing, is they're doing a lot of market analysis and we can talk to them about that.
Yeah, okay, so there was one more option,
Oh, yeah.
so,
Yes.
okay, so we've had a very robust discussion about being agnostic and sort of exploring all the options, but there is potentially an option to focus specifically on cricket. And it was expressed from the state that there may be resources or interest at the state level to engage with us if there was a focus on cricket. And no promises at all, but that might also open up some cash from the companies or the teams that are looking to locate cricket stadiums in this region to support the study. Obviously, it would potentially compromise the scope in terms of how open-ended it is. You may be able to still have some aspect of, well, let's prioritize cricket, but see if cricket does, what else is there, and then, continue to put cricket in the sort of forefront of this analysis. Honestly, we don't know what the resources attached to going down that road are, just that there could be some. But it does make it a little easier to fund, and might be a little faster and direct in that we're talking about cricket, and anecdotally anyway, there seems to be a gap around that sport. I don't know if there's any appetite to go down that road in this group.
So in my opinion, we'll do it parallel, like do that's great, but still we do our own thing because it's just, they're not super useful for anything else.
Sure.
Darren,
Yeah, hey, so this is just a point for context, on cricket. The Parks Department has, built a couple of cricket fields that get really good use, and there's demand for more. We were aware of the funding source that was alluded to, and a former planning board member of ours asked us to look into it for sites, for potential stadium, because what they're really interested in is, we understood it was a full stadium, parking, lights. And so the Parks Department did a moderately intensive site selection investigation for where we could put a stadium in our department, in our land. We own 37,000 acres of land. A lot of it has trees on it. We couldn't find a location. So the extent to which the Parks Department is on this task force, because the final location might end up being on parkland, which I assume is kind of why we're here, and in addition to our interest in sports, I would just flag that, and that's actually a relevant comment for anything we end up doing in terms of location scouting. The Parks Department does not have a low-hanging fruit location for a large complex like this, and that is based on our investigations of specifically a cricket stadium. So that's not weighing in on cricket one way or the other for the purpose of this. It's just to provide some context in terms of available land, park land. It's going to be very constrained. So I just kind of want to set expectations around that up front, but also echo that we're aware of anecdotal and league demand for cricket. So
thanks, Darren. Kelly, Kelly and Terry, I'll get to you next, and then Tom.
Darren, my question is, does that include the municipalities of Gaithersburg and Rockville?
no.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Terry, you.
Yeah, I'm just, echoing what Balil said, is that, obviously the state was approached by, the ownership group of the professional cricket team that, currently uses DC as their namesake, and actually plays all their games in North Carolina and Texas, because that's where the league currently plays. They are looking for, obviously, a facility. Stadium is a priority, but they're looking at anything that can be flexible to go from multi-use opportunity grounds to, maybe during a certain portionality of a year, making it into cricket specific kind of. So they're looking at mixed use viability. And I know they were looking at Park and Rec as well as commercial real estate and the like. And, you know, when they reached out to us and I being on this task force, I said there could be some synergies of working simultaneously as we're identifying the needs of the sports tourism market in Montgomery County, that this could be something that, you know, does, you know, raise its, you know, rise up there in the demand needs. But I told them, I said, the task force is designed to explore and evaluate that stuff. Whether cricket comes out as a contender or not is a different story. But I just didn't want to be doing this work and then at the same time another group is working simultaneously in concert and almost in something we're exactly working on. So I just wanted to throw caution that there's that going on.
Thanks, Terry. Tom, I'll turn it to you.
So we have done some work on cricket to this very area. And so both, first of all, I would just conclude by what Matt said. The unique characteristics of the cricket oval are challenging. They take up a lot. They're not used for so many other things. But so that I'd say I tied a line with Matt right out of the box on that, and that's probably the conclusion. But the other side, where we're talking about predictive analytics, cricket for a variety of demographic and other needs, other factors, is definitely growing and growing in a way that suggests it would have tourism value as well as participation value. The World Cup of Cricket came to the U.S. for the first time 2 months ago. Then they played in Fort Lauderdale and in New York, amongst other places. They were just booming. But when it rained, they couldn't even they just passed it up, because cricket's odd because it takes a long time. So meaning the actual games take a whole day and they have a different thing for tournaments and all that kind of stuff. But the point is, let me succinctly put it. We've been approached by every cricket person in the last 10 years saying, you know, our organization, which dictates the ways in which people see the participation numbers, you should do more in cricket. We would agree that cricket does lend itself, as of right this moment, to an emerging sport that has huge upside potential. You look at the demographics, what's growing, et cetera. And you add to that it is a sport in the LA 28 Olympics that is likely to get much more exposure. So if it were ever going to happen, and I would just say back in terms of thing that I spent half my life on, it feels like pickleball 15 years ago in Naples, Florida, they decided they were going to kind of make it a thing. And now they've had the US Open there, and it's an unbelievable economic event, and they've never really invested anything. They're still using public facilities and like Parks Department pickleball courts, and it's one of the biggest pickleball events in the world. And my point is that while it is problematic when you look specifically at the nature of a cricket oval, it's worth looking at by the definition of emerging sport and future opportunities, people likely to travel, people with money who would be committed, amount of time they spend at the event, all the factors. So it's both sides. Sorry for the long answer.
And can I make one more comment about that? Zula is headquartered here.
Right, in Rockville.
Yola, yeah, that's a pickleball company.
Yeah.
They make paddleboards and yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so as we wrap up here, it's 12:58, so I want to be mindful. Here's as we kind of pull together on this, I guess the question I would have to the task force is, given the opportunity to maybe help us with some funding, is there a way that the task force agrees, as we kind of continue putting together this scope and trying to get a consultant and all of this, should we explore somehow getting some data on cricket that could potentially help us with funding our study? Or does that compromise the task force itself? Because, you know, I would say as soon as we do that, people from soccer world and people from other sports are going to be coming to us and says, well, why don't you focus on our needs as well as cricket? Or so is it worth, I guess, to the committee, is it worth exploring, trying to develop that somehow in the scope that we can work with the state and potentially get some funding? Or does that jeopardize our role in a fair assessment of sports tourism?
It's how you word it. If you ask for an emphasis in that particular sport, if we could ask for an emphasis and an evaluation of that particular sport, it wouldn't, I don't think it would eliminate looking at everything else.
Yeah.
But present.
I'll defer to Bob.
think
I would think it's the way
presents
it's
a
right.
bias, though. And that's what it's been my argument before, because I think a lot of people came into this task force looking for an arena.
Yeah.
Or that multi-space indoor space, that they came in with that, and I don't want that to taint what the actual consultant finds.
Right.
If that's what he's looking for, he's gonna find it.
Right. If you tell them that's what you
Yeah.
want, they're gonna find it.
So,
I
I mean,
would, maybe they explore the top 3 emerging sports and they give us information on that,
well, I mean,
and then that can,
what we're asking him to do is to find the trend. So like, if the trend says cricket, then the trend is cricket. If the trend is pickleball, it's pickleball. Or if the trend is X, Y, Z sport, I mean, that's what we're paying him to
Emerging
find.
sports.
Okay.
Well, we have a stepwise process, so like we could kind of just say, hey, no matter wherever we are in the step, we're always gonna sort of think about cricket a little bit. So like when we do the market study, like maybe we don't analyze it because we already know that we're gonna look at a case study of a cricket field, figure out whether it fits and model the feasibility. So we actually don't include it in the market analysis with just the other 3 steps. And maybe that, just because, and those are like hard tangible numbers that require analysis. And so maybe that would entice somebody to support it while we don't actually have to do all the other work because we already know that it's sort of pro forma. Maybe.
Okay. As we wrap up here, it is 1 o'clock. I want to be mindful of everybody's time and I like to start and end these meetings on time. So we'll kind of table that. And if you have any strong opinions on that, please email us and let us know. Terry, one last question that I had for you. Is the Stadium Authority currently working on any studies that is somehow related to what we are doing? Is there anything in progress right now, I would say, or imminent in your scope of work that is related to what we're doing?
So they are currently, working with Frostburg State on, field utilization and the like that pertains to sports tourism and their college campus. We are also reviewing a facility on the Eastern Shore in Ocean City and Worcester County in collaboration with both of those governments. And obviously the ongoing work with the Blue Line Corridor, which came out of House Bill 897 a couple years ago, which is exploring the area that leads up to what's the new bank that just named the facility where the Commanders play, West Bank or whatever it's called, Federal Union. So looking at what that corridor could be. So those are the things that are currently in the queue. And then obviously, the work continues on with a place like Pimlico, which doesn't really impact this group.
So it's also not necessarily through Terry's office, but they're looking at the Baltimore Convention Center too. But
Yeah.
using that whole model.
Yes.
Okay, great. Our next meeting is October.
The second Wednesday of October.
Yeah,
which
second
is,
Wednesday of October.
Apologies, it is the 9th of October.
So we will work on firming up the conversation today, getting the scope ready, looking at the procurement options, sending and sharing that data. Please, anybody who has data that they think would be important, resources for the task force, please start sending that in and any information on that. And unless there's anything else, I think we are adjourned. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you in a month.
Thank you now.
Good conversation. Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody.
thanks, I appreciate it.